Why are Zoomers becoming Catholic? I was having this conversation with someone at my church last week, and they brought up an idea that it's because young male Zoomers want a more masculine form of Christianity. And I hadn't thought of it in this sense. I hadn't thought of it not properly in this sense. Of course, the tradition and the culture of Catholicism does seem to be more masculine. But I think it's something a little bit more concrete than that. Something a bit less sort of culturally um, driven. And by this I mean, of course, there is a resurgence in trying to find a better form of masculinity within the Zoomers, a truer, much more traditional form of masculinity among the Zoomers. But what I think it really is that we as Zoomers have seen our older generations destroy our culture, destroy spiritual understanding, destroy transcendency, rob us of rituals, rob us of material resources, and have been annoyingly sarcastic and annoyingly insincere and exhibiting a refusal to understand us as a generation. You will often hear the boomer say, well, I pulled myself up by the bootstraps and I bought my house and I had this many children and I had this and that, or I did this and that. But they did these things at a time during economic flourishing, far more flourishing than we have today. They bought their house for a much cheaper and reasonable price than what houses are today. It didn't cost so much to bring up a child either. And the dating market was far more open and easily accessible. And you had infrastructure and institutions in which you could find a mate and network with people, gain friends. What does the Zoomer have? If they can get a job at all, if all the jobs in that area haven't been soaked up by people who are not from here, by women as well, they tend to be far more employed than men, and also jobs in which they can do. Now, of course, it's often said, and it's often said because it's true, that companies are looking for experienced employees with this and that degree. But how does somebody gain experience if they can't get a job, or can't gain experience because they can't get a job because they need experience? It's a circular requirement. And so they see the life around them. They see that it's decaying. They see that it's not for them anymore. That which would have been their inheritance has been taken away from them. And they think, well, the one thing I've got left is my mind and my soul. And it seems reasonable to me, as someone who has been stood on, downtrodden, told I am this and that, and unable to find fulfillment in work or in the romantic realm, that I'll find fulfillment in something which has come before this, and something which will come after this, and something which has always been around because of its usefulness. And they look around themselves and think, well, what is that? And they see that that is religion. Or perhaps they are lucky enough, like myself, to have been contacted by the Holy Spirit and compelled through a spiritual compulsion rather than a mental or material compulsion. And now, broadly, Zoomers will join Christianity or come to Christ more broadly. But it does seem to be that they are coming towards more traditional forms of Christianity, Catholicism and Orthodoxy. I won't speak too much about Orthodoxy in this video because that's not something that's familiar to me. But as far as I can tell, the reasons why people are joining Orthodoxy are for similar or the same reasons as to why they're joining Catholicism. Now I'll go through the reasons as to why people are joining it. It is a religion, or it is a form of Christianity, which is by its nature one that seems to be more true, in that it is a continuation of the first church to be set up. It has an apostolic link. It has its links to Christ. Protestantism doesn't have this. Your local Baptist church doesn't have that link. That's not to say that it's a heretical or a church which is untrue or false. Some people may think so, but I don't myself as a Protestant. But to a Zoomer, someone who does not have a reason to be a Protestant, they will look at the types of Christianity and see in the Catholic Church some very particular things. They'll see its history. They'll see that it hews itself. It reevaluates what it believes. It has a tradition of philosophy which isn't just random people popping their heads up and saying, well, I have the right idea. No, I have the right idea. It has people who are part of the institution itself who are basing their arguments and their ideas off of their history and figuring it out together and figuring out what the reality of the church is and the reality of the faith too. They also see that it is far more transcendent. They see that the rituals involved in Catholicism and the aesthetics of the church as well, and the hierarchies of the clergy are far more in line with transcendency. They're far more in line with being part of a community. They're far more in line with natural religion. Protestantism in the low churches tends to be in a building with whitewashed walls, or simply just white walls if no painting lies beneath. There is very little structure to the service. And the person giving the sermon also has very little structure to the sermon. They're also someone dressed in jeans and a shirt, maybe if they're lucky, who is just rambling about something in the Bible. Now, you'll have good pastors and you'll have not so good pastors. You'll have pastors and vicars or whatever you call them, who are better at doing a sermon than others. And they're better at different types of sermons too. And this isn't to, I'm not saying any of this to put down Protestants or put down Protestant pastors and clergy, but it is something that we need to think about. Now, of course, in the high church, within Protestantism, you have very similar rituals to the Catholics. You have frankincense, you have similar music, you have nice paintings and decorations. You have all the things which would make a ritual transcendent. But there is something missing. There are a few things missing, in fact, but they all stem from one place. And that is that there is no real binding authority that seems to police itself. Within Catholicism, you have this binding authority. You have this historical authority. You have a figurehead, which is the Pope. Now, of course, in Anglicanism, you have the Archbishop of Canterbury. But with our recent archbishops, their authority doesn't really matter. And their authority is also subversive to Christianity as well. But that's a different discussion. But you have this self-policing authority within Catholicism that you don't really find even in the high churches of Protestantism. Now, some may have this, and obviously things differ from country to country. But by and large, the view that people have of Protestantism is that it is a shallow, often on the lines of the megachurch, rock concert for Jesus that doesn't defend itself in the face of adversity. And of course, the Zoomer wants to be part of an institution that defends itself. Everyone wants to be part of an institution that defends itself. But the Zoomer, especially the young Zoomer male like myself, is more likely to be right-wing, whether it's centre-right or if it's far-right. And so when the church is attacked by the left and by liberalism, the young Zoomer wants to be part of a church which says, no, we are like this. This is how we live. This is how we choose to live. This is how we choose to always live. And I will continue to teach my congregation the words of Christ, not the words of Rousseau, not the words of John Locke, and not the words of Karl Marx. But with Protestantism, you do have people more commonly who have decided to take it upon themselves to preach a different doctrine, to preach a different scripture, one which is caught up with the times, one which is liberal and lovely and nice. Now, I don't know if you've read the Bible, but Jesus was not this kind of liberal hippie that went around in a tie-dye shirt and said, you just got to love everyone, man. The whole time in his 3 years of ministry was spent arguing with people. It was spent tearing down a legalistic worldview. It was spent, yes, looking after the poor, yes, being nice to people. But that wasn't his whole thesis. It wasn't just be nice to people, let people walk all over you. He said, there will come a time where you will face persecution and adversity. And he said, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. And people so often forget this. Protestants so often forget this, that we're not called to either be women or castrated men. We are not called to be lifeless and shallow. We are not called to rid ourselves of any vitality and of any strength. We are called to believe fervently in the Lord and to, I would argue, to defend ourselves. Now, some Christians would rather be martyrs than defend themselves. But as a practitioner of evangelism and rhetoric, people do not want to join something where if they are attacked, they will be judged for defending themselves. They will be judged for fighting back. All because you cannot see the nuances in Christ's teachings. And so, when people look at the churches around them, They see the Protestant churches who have become liberalized. They have pride flags in their buildings. They teach a strange form of social understanding, which most people don't even believe in. And what they see in other churches is something which hasn't changed with the times. They haven't changed with the pressure of the outside world. It is a common joke in Britain, or at least was a common joke, to have someone portrayed as a vicar who wants to be down with the kids. He wants to be cool and hip and trendy. And of course, it's funny to see. It's funny to see an older chap who doesn't really understand the slang and the environments that these people are in, and try to make himself look as though he does understand it. But he didn't need to try and understand it. These were things which have passed. The slang has passed. The culture has passed. And what it's done instead is create a precedent for churches to move along with the times, to say, oh yeah, you know what? These new ideas, they're perfectly fine. In fact, Jesus said them himself. Instead of being an anchor or being anchored to the tradition, to the teachings of Christ, they instead allowed the boat to float off with the other boats that were around them. And people, or vicars and Protestant clergy, have said, well, it's so hard to teach Christ's teachings, or to teach this thing or that thing, or to do anything about this subject, because otherwise people will leave the church. People will complain about us. And if your primary fear is that people will complain about you and a couple people will leave and you won't bring on the new hip youngsters or the hippies, then your priorities are in the wrong place, my friend. Jesus told you explicitly that you are going to be persecuted, and you allowed yourself to invite your persecution. At the time, you were not being persecuted. People were complaining about you. People in universities were complaining about you. But you still had congregations. You still had working men going to your churches. And now when I go to a high church, you may get one working man in there. That may even be myself. But it's primarily populated by old women. And really, what should have been done is for you as a church, or you as a vicar, to say, no, I am teaching the words of Christ. I am I'm giving people a moral lesson, because people really want a moral lesson. As much as people pretend they don't, they really want to be told what is good and what is bad, so they don't have to think about it. A lot of people don't want to be philosophers. In fact, I'd imagine the majority of people don't want to philosophize on things. Some of us have to, because people aren't doing their jobs. People aren't saying, no, you shouldn't steal. No, you shouldn't get drunk and fornicate. No, you shouldn't, do this and that thing. The greatest mistake the church ever made was keeping up with the times, funnily enough, because it hasn't worked out for them. And yet many churches, even today, still insist on changing with the tides, on toning down their rhetoric. When your enemy's rhetoric is as violent and as extreme as the enemy's rhetoric is today, That the enemy being liberalism, the enemy being anti-Christian leftism, communism, Marxism. Your rhetoric must not be toned down. Your rhetoric must be loud. You must make yourselves known as a presence. And all the laws that have been put in place to silence people in this country may not have been even introduced had you raised the alarm, had you said, no, this is an attack on free speech, it's an attack on just normal speech as well, and it will allow people to be prosecuted for fairly reasonable ideas. You have dug your own grave, Protestants, and it's time to dig yourselves out of it. You can still be Protestants, you don't need to become Catholic, but you need to understand that people want transcendence. People want an institution that's going to fight for them and themselves. You do not need to be part of the culture nor the elite. I have heard it said by many churches to be in the world, not of the world. But you need to start following your own teachings then, because you are very much in the world and of it. You want to be thought of as nice and kind and this and that. But ultimately, whether your enemy thinks you're kind or not, whether your enemy thinks you're nice, it doesn't matter. They're your enemy. They're going to think you're horrible no matter what. You can be as nice as you want. You can be as kind as you want. You could even solve world hunger. But your enemy, seeing that they themselves are your enemy, and you are opposed to their beliefs, whether it's philosophically or religiously, will find whatever it is that you have to say, no, you are opposed on this. You are opposed to me because of this thing. No, really, you're evil. Yeah, you saved all these lives, but really, because of such and such a thing, you're evil. It's time to grow up, Protestant church, or Protestant churches, and start looking at what the Catholics are doing and try and do it 10 times better. Bring in the bells and whistles that we think are, or that you think are unnecessary. Yes, it's not necessary for our salvation to have frankincense burning, or to have nice pictures, or to have stained glass windows, or organ music, or hymns, and not have rock music. But when people go to church, they don't want to be going to what is essentially a funny conference with a bit of nice rock music. You go to church for transcendence. If you just think about it on a sociological level, you look at the religions the world over, and they all have the same thing. They have an adherence to stimulating every sense: sight, sound, feel, even as well, smell, taste. And when you strip all of this away and try to just attack the heart or the soul, it's far more difficult, because when those senses are stimulated, the ability to take in the message of Christ is far easier when you are in the trance of the ritual. These are not idols, these are not false gods. These are merely things which make it easier to evangelize. And evangelize even to people who believe as well. The reason why people are turning to Catholicism is not because of online gurus telling them to reject modernity and embrace tradition, but what really is happening is that the Zoomer is coming to those online gurus who say these things because they already feel that way. They already feel like they should embrace tradition and reject modernity. They are already feeling like there's something more in the world, especially when everything's been stripped of the world. Everything good and enjoyable in the material world is decaying or has been robbed from them. they will go the spiritual path, and they'll go to the path that's more transcendent. They won't go to the rock concerts in the community hall. They will go to the place which is purpose built to bring them from their secular stage to their spiritual stage. Protestant churches need to remember this. If they cannot remember this, they are doomed to die. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.